The key thing to remember about the American political system is that it's a first past the post single member district network. You vote for a specific person who would then represent a specific group of people in a specific geography. You don't vote for a party, you vote for a guy or a gal. Because of this system, we tend to get two very, very large coalitions of groups who represent two big tent groups. Because the idea is if you can get one more vote than whoever comes in second, then you're going to win the seat. And so if you had like 9 parties, you could do that. It was just 15% of the vote. But by combining these coalitions into larger and larger and bigger tents, you force that number up and you make it more likely that you're going to defeat whoever is waiting in the wings. That's one of the reasons why we almost never have a third party that is serious, because you're then splitting the vote 3 ways, and whoever's the biggest coalition tends to win regardless of what the policy happens to be. We have traditionally, for the last, let's call it 60 years, have had these coalitions of coalitions. Now, for those of you who can remember back to the dark days of when Donald Trump ran against Hillary Clinton, you will remember that this is not how things went down. Black Americans saw Hillary Clinton as a white chick who had already lived in the White House and she didn't need to be there again. The socialists had a real problem with her because she was seen as a representative of Wall Street. Same with the under 30s who saw her as too old. The Greens and unions got into a fight over what a good economic policy would be. Unmarried women liked her, aside from the fact that she was married. On the Republican side, the business community looked at Trump and they saw not a business person, but a marketer, and not a very good one at that. The national security folks actually thought that Hillary Clinton had more experience in that field than anything that Donald Trump had. The evangelicals like, okay, Trump has not just had 1 affair or 2 affairs or 3 affairs, but 13 documented affairs, including one with a porn star. And we saw a split in that community between the younger ones who tried to use ethics as a guide for their voting, who didn't really care for him, and the older ones who were willing to sublimate that for political power. Pro-lifers, the pro-choicers weren't sure where to stand because Donald Trump kept changing his position. And the fiscal conservatives, again, saw Hillary Clinton as actually more conservative on most issues than Donald Trump. And then the Catholics in the middle just wanted to take a shower. And by the time all was said and done and the dust settled on Election Day, this is how things actually broke down. This is normal. Not the breakdown, but the concept of the breakdown. Because every generation or two, when you have 2 big tents, things have changed. The world has changed. We've changed. Demographics have changed. Economic patterns have changed. Employment patterns have changed. And every time that happens, the factions that make up the parties move around. They rise and fall in power within their own big tents. And sometimes factions jump into the swing category, or maybe even switch sides completely. The last time we went through one of these reshufflings for real, the really big one, was in the Great Depression. And then big business were all Democrats and African Americans were all Republicans, and they switched side into a new format that held for several decades. We're in the midst of this process right now. This is not the second time we've done it. This is not the third time we've done it. This is the 6th time we've done it. And when we emerge from this on the other side, we will be entering what will be called the 7th party structure. But we're not there yet. These transition periods take anywhere from 4 to 12 years. We're in year 6 to 7 right now. We probably have one more political cycle to go through before this all settles. It means that what we think of as Democrats and Republicans have already irreversibly changed. They just haven't settled on what their new form is going to be, which means it's a little bit easier to wrap your mind around of this instead of looking at this Democrat versus Republican, but instead to look at it on a matrix. If you're at the top of this matrix, you want the government out of your personal life. If you're at the bottom, you think the government should be involved in people's personal lives in order to protect certain social norms. If you're on the right, you want the government out of your wallet. And if you're on the left, you think the government should have its hand in people's wallets in order to remake society in some way. And you can combine these in any number of ways. If you're at the top left, a social liberal and an economic conservative, you really deeply approve all of the work that the bureaucrats in Washington do, and you want to throw a party to thank them where you will serve arsenic cake. And if you're at the top left, an economic and a social liberal, you look forward to the glorious day when we're all dancing around a campfire, holding hands, singing Kumbaya, and wearing government-issued gunny sacks that were paid for by the confiscation of all private property. We are all on here somewhere, and this is where all of our political factions lie. The blue, that's what we have traditionally in the last few decades thought of the Democrats. The red is the Republican alliance, and the greens are our current traditional swing voters. Enter Trump. The single biggest impact that he has had is he's elevated one faction above all the others. And they came in from left field, right field, I guess it would be. The American populace have really sat out the last 6 presidential elections until Donald Trump came about. And so he was basically able to activate a group that was on the sidelines, had not been part of the process. And in doing so, he made this very powerful, very cohesive, very loyal voting bloc that I would argue today is the single most numerous voting bloc in the system. And under Trump's first term, they got a taste of power for the first time, and they liked it, and they are not going away. But in drawing this group into the system, he ended up picking fights with 4 factions that had until now kind of been considered the adults in the room. And he ended up campaigning against their candidates for Congress. He purged them from his administration. And as of March of this year, he purged all of their representatives from the Republican National Committee. And as we've seen in the last couple of days, none of these people are represented. It is all folks from the populist wing. They, for all intents and purposes, are now swing voters. But Trump was also able to bait in other groups who were closer to his social conservative core supporters. This includes none other than a minority with the Hispanics and the unions, who have been a core part of the Democratic coalition really for the last 150 years. This today is the Trump Republican coalition. It is powerful, it is large, it is loyal, and it is not enough to win an election. Remember, big tents are how you win an election, and this group has a very real problem reaching out and forming alliances with other people. The unions in the business community, for the first time in American history, are not in one coalition or another. They have traditionally been the backbone of the two parties, typically on opposite sides, and their conversations, their debates, their compromises is what is responsible for economic policy. And so if you look back to the Trump administration, or you look today at the Biden administration, and you're wondering what the hell is going on with economic policy, well, there isn't one, because the people who can do math are not in the room. And that is going to be a problem until this all settles out, until one or two of these factions joins one or the other coalitions. Which ones will go which way? Way too soon to tell. They've basically been, especially the business community, ignored in this dust up. The other issue, from my point of view, which is just as important, if not more, is that the national security folks are not even in the room. And if you look at these two factions, business and national security, that has been the core of American foreign policy going back over a century. And again, they are no longer in the room. In times when the American political system is unsettled like it is today, it's hard to build a consensus on anything domestically, and we tend to ignore everything internationally. And if you look at the third to the fourth transition and the fourth to the fifth transition, the first one is late Reconstruction, the fourth to the fifth is in the Great Depression. The Americans basically didn't play a role in much of anything from a government point of view. And a lot of things went down in these periods. In late Reconstruction, we had the mass urbanization and the industrialization of Europe. We had European monarchies that were snapping like matchsticks and starting to form alliances with one another that would lead to the Great World Wars. We had the rise of Japan as a major power, and we saw independent business people in the United States basically go out and make foreign policy for themselves, a legacy that still poisons our relationship with Latin America to this day. As for the Great Depression, we all talk about how horrible it was here. Well, it was horrible everywhere. And this saw the rise of totalitarianism communism across Europe and Northeast Asia. This is the rise of Hitler. This is the Stalin consolidation in the Soviet Union. This is the Spanish and the Chinese Civil War. And this is Japan basically going bonsai in the entire Pacific. Now, I don't mean to suggest here that if the United States had had its domestic political ducks in order, that none of these things would have happened. What I'm trying to communicate is that because the United States ducks were scattered, we didn't even have the option of playing any role in any of these major changes to the global condition. And this time around, that's a really big fucking deal, because in the next 10 years, we're going to see the demographic dissolution of the Chinese system. We're probably going to see the end of the European Union. We're going to see a significant expansion of Russia's war in Ukraine to involve a number of nuclear powers. We're probably going to see a war in the Middle East that hits the energy sector. And of course, when China breaks, all hell's going to break loose in the Middle East. We are going to have famines on a continental scale in various parts of the Eastern Hemisphere, and we're also going to have global energy shortages. And the United States, if it can't get this stuff figured out real soon, is not going to be able to do much of anything about any of that. I focus on the really, really big pictures. And while all of these things are crazy and substantial, the impact directly on the United States is somewhat limited. We're the world's largest food producer and exporter. We're the world's largest energy producer and processor, and now exporter of finished goods or finished refined product. And we're in the process of massively expanding our industrial plant to insulate ourselves from the Chinese. These are all good things. And they mean if the world breaks, we're in a pretty good spot. But if the world breaks, we will still feel a lot of it. And as long as we're dicking around with figuring out what the next political evolution is going to be, we won't have the bandwidth to focus on international affairs in a seriously meaningful way, no matter who wins the presidency.